Hello, and welcome back to Cursed Lullabies. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered like cursed lullabies, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. My landlord comes into my house in the middle of the night, walks straight to the second-floor bathroom, stays in there for an hour, then leaves. He never turns on the light. He never says anything. He doesn't even look at me. Not really. Not in any normal way. The first time it happened, I was working. I work remote data entry, which sounds easy until you're on a deadline and your brain is melting from staring at the same kind of numbers and fields for hours. That night, I was already behind, and I was pushing hard to catch up. I remember I had a mug in my hand, coffee that had gone cold, and I was trying to tell myself I could still finish the project if I just focused. Then I heard the front door. Not a knock, not the sound of someone outside. The door itself opening. It was so casual that for a second my brain didn't react properly. I didn't think intruder, I thought wind, or door didn't latch, something harmless. But then I heard footsteps, heavy, slow steps, like someone who wasn't trying to be quiet but also wasn't trying to announce themselves, like they didn't care if they were heard. I stood up so fast my chair nearly tipped. I brought the mug up without thinking, the way people do in movies when they grab the nearest object, and I almost threw it down the hallway. Then the figure came into the light from my monitor, and I recognized him. Great Uncle Jim. In that moment, the fear didn't disappear. It just changed shape. Because it's one thing to think a stranger broke into your home. It's another thing to realize a family member is walking into your house at night like it's nothing, and you have no clue why. He didn't say hello. Didn't even nod. He just walked past me like I was furniture. I said his name. I know I did. I remember the way it sounded, small and confused. Jim, what are you doing? He kept going, heading toward the stairs. He moved with purpose, like he'd done it 1,000 times, like there was only one place he intended to be. I followed him. The house I'm staying in is 2 stories. From the outside, it looks like a cabin, the kind tourists rent for a weekend. Dark wood, sloped roof, that cozy mountain style. But inside, it's more modern than you'd expect. Carpet upstairs, granite counters downstairs, nice trim, clean finishes. It's honestly worth way more than what I pay. I'm here because Jim owns the place. He's my landlord, but he's also family. He lives about a 15-minute hike uphill from me, in a smaller cabin up on a plateau in the southern Appalachian Mountains. His place is more like what you'd imagine. Older, quieter, creaky in the winter. Mine is the nice one. When I first came here, he tried to let me stay for free. His deal was that I'd help him haul wood down to his shop in town, help chop it, stack it, keep things moving. I couldn't accept living somewhere for nothing, not even with the work trade. I don't make a lot, but I make enough to pay something. So we settled on $300 a month, plus I'd still help with the wood. It felt fair. It felt normal. Until that night when he walked into my home like he had every right to be there at 3 in the morning. I trailed him up the stairs. The second-floor bathroom is at the end of the hallway. There are other rooms up there, but he didn't hesitate. Didn't glance left or right. He went straight to that bathroom door, opened it, stepped inside, and shut it behind him. No light, no fan, nothing. I stood there for a few seconds staring at the door, expecting him to come back out immediately like he'd gone in by mistake, or he was sleepwalking, or he'd realize I was there and finally say something. Minutes passed, then more. I knocked, lightly at first, then harder. I asked if he was okay. I asked what he needed. I even tried the handle, but the door was locked. I leaned my ear toward it, listening for anything that would make sense. The sound of a toilet flush, water running, a cough, a sigh, a shift of weight. Anything human. There was nothing, just silence so complete it made my skin crawl. Like the room behind the door was empty. I looked at the time every few minutes. I thought I'd leave and go back to work, but I couldn't. Not with him in there, not with the door locked and no sound. I kept imagining him collapsing in there, hitting his head, bleeding out while I stared at spreadsheets downstairs like an idiot. An hour after he went in, the lock clicked. The door opened. Jim stepped out. He didn't look at me. He didn't acknowledge the fact that I was standing there, tense and waiting, probably pale. He didn't apologize. Didn't explain. He walked past me and went down the stairs, slow and steady, like the whole thing was as normal as making a cup of coffee. I followed him again, because what else do you do when someone walks into your house at night, locks themselves in your bathroom for an hour, and refuses to speak? I went down the steps after him, my heart beating so hard it made me dizzy. He went straight out the front door, no goodbye, no pause. He simply left. I stood in the living room staring at the closed door, trying to make my brain fit the pieces together. For a while, I convinced myself there must be some logical explanation. Maybe he had a plumbing issue at his cabin. Maybe his bathroom was broken and he didn't want to admit it. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he didn't want to wake me and thought it would be quick. But even those excuses didn't fit. Why not use the downstairs bathroom? Why the second floor? Why lock the door? Why not speak to me? And why the complete lack of sound? I waited for the next day to bring it up. I told myself I'd mention it casually, like it was no big deal, to see how he reacted. But I never got the chance. Jim didn't come by that day, or the next. He didn't call. He didn't text. He wasn't the type to message much anyway, but this was different. It was like the moment he walked out my door that night, the entire event was erased for him. I tried to let it go. Exactly one night later, at 3:21 in the morning. I know the time because by then I was already half awake, waiting. I had told myself it was just nerves, that I was being paranoid, but my body didn't believe me. I kept checking the clock. Every little house sound made me sit up. At 3:21, the front door opened, the same slow footsteps, the same path through the house. Jim moved like he was on rails. He walked right past the living room and went to the stairs, never turning his head, never reacting to anything. I called out, louder this time. "Jim, what is this? Why are you here?" He didn't respond. My stomach twisted with anger and fear and something else, something I didn't want to name, because the truth is, part of me didn't feel like I was being ignored, like I wasn't there. I ran up the stairs to get ahead of him, stepped into the hallway, and planted myself near the bathroom door. He came up the stairs and stopped a few feet away from me. For a second, I thought he'd finally have to acknowledge me. I was in his way. He'd have to say something, or at least look at me. He didn't. He just stood there, facing forward, eyes open, breathing slow. I couldn't tell if he was even focusing. His face wasn't angry or tired or confused. It looked blank, like a mask. Then he shifted slightly and moved around me. I swear he didn't squeeze past like a normal person would. It wasn't like, "Excuse me." There was no human hesitation. It was more like walking around a chair. He opened the bathroom door, stepped inside, and locked it again. I knocked. I tried the handle. I begged him to answer me. At one point, I even considered calling 911. But what would I say? My great uncle is in my bathroom and he won't talk to me? I pictured the dispatcher's silence, the way they'd think I was on drugs or having some kind of breakdown. So I waited. An hour later, he came out, walked downstairs, and left. This became my life. For the past 2 months, 57 nights in a row, Jim has entered my house at 3:21 a.m., gone straight to the second-floor bathroom, locked the door, stayed inside for exactly an hour, then left. Every night, no exceptions. I've tried locking the front door. I've tried deadbolts. I've tried locking every window. He gets in anyway. I don't hear the lock break. I don't hear splintering wood. The door will be locked when I check it before bed. And then at 3:21, it opens like it was never secured. I've tried locking the bathroom door from the outside earlier in the evening, thinking if he couldn't get in, he'd have to stop. At 3:21, he still goes up there, and somehow the door opens for him. Or he locks it from the inside, and I can't even explain how he got in without me hearing anything. I've tried confronting him during the day. I went up to his cabin once on a clear afternoon, when the woods were bright and normal and I could pretend the nights weren't happening. He was outside splitting wood, same as always. He looked fine, healthy, awake. He said hello like nothing was wrong. So I asked him directly. He just stared at me for a moment, like he didn't understand the words. Then he smiled a little, not in a friendly way, more like a reflex, and went back to his work. That was it. No answer. No confusion. Like the question slid right off him. I tried again, more serious. I told him I was losing sleep. I was falling behind at work. I needed him to stop coming into my house at night. This time he paused long enough to look at me, but his eyes didn't settle. They didn't focus. It was like he was looking through me at something far behind my head. Then he picked up another log. I left, shaking, and I told myself I'd call someone. I'd call the police, or a lawyer, or a neighbor, or anyone who could tell me what I'm allowed to do here. But the problem is, he's family. And technically, I'm not even a legal tenant in any official sense. It's a handshake deal. There's no formal lease, just an agreement between relatives in the woods, with cash and firewood as part of the payment. I keep thinking, if I call the cops, how does that go? They come out, and Jim is gone, because he always leaves before 4:30. There will be no sign of forced entry. No damage, just me, exhausted, claiming my great-uncle walks into my house every night and disappears into a bathroom for an hour without making a sound. Even writing it like that makes me feel stupid. But it's real. It's been real for 57 straight days, and my entire life is bent around it now. My sleep is broken. My work is suffering. I've missed deadlines. I've made excuses I'm tired of making. I've started napping in the afternoon like an old man. I'm jumpy all the time. Every night I sit in bed watching the clock, and no matter how I try to distract myself, my body tenses as 3:21 gets closer. That time has started to feel cursed. Tonight, I couldn't take it anymore. It was almost 3 in the morning as I typed this, trying to keep my thoughts straight, trying to leave some record of what's happening, in case something changes, in case one night he doesn't leave, in case I don't wake up, in case I start doubting my own memory and need proof I wasn't imagining things. I decided I was going to sit in the bathroom and wait for him, not outside the door, inside, because I need to know what he's doing in there. I need to know why it's the upstairs bathroom, specifically. I need to know why he never turns on the light. I need to know why an hour is so exact it might as well be timed. And most of all, I need to know why he won't look at me like I'm real. So I went upstairs before 3:21 and brought my phone with me. I sat in the tub, fully dressed, like that somehow made it less strange. I told myself I would stay awake. I would record if I had to. I would not let my brain drift, but sleep has been eating at me for weeks. The second I sat down in that quiet, dark bathroom, the warmth of the house around me and the steady hum of my own breathing pulled me under. I must have fallen asleep while I was still typing. I woke up with my neck stiff and my heart racing, the way you wake up when you know you weren't supposed to sleep. My phone screen was dim. My fingers were cramped. For a second, I didn't even remember why I was in the tub, and then the memory hit me all at once and my stomach dropped. I checked the time, 4:30 a.m. Panic washed through me. I sat up so fast it made the room spin. I stared at the bathroom door, expecting it to be open, expecting the hallway to be empty, expecting I'd missed him and wasted my chance. I reached for the doorknob and pulled the door open. He was standing there, right outside the bathroom, in the hallway, facing me. He wasn't moving. He wasn't blinking. He was just there, like he had been waiting in that exact spot for me to open the door. The fear that went through me wasn't the normal kind. It wasn't adrenaline. It was colder than that. It felt like my body recognized something my mind couldn't understand. People talk about a 1,000-yard stare, but that doesn't fit. This wasn't distant. It wasn't vacant either. There was something in his eyes that felt too focused, too deep, like he was looking at a place inside me I didn't know existed. How do you describe a look that doesn't feel like it's traveling through air? It felt like headlights from a truck coming straight at you on a dark road. Not just bright, but like once you were in it, you couldn't step out. I couldn't breathe. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I just stood there in the doorway, one hand on the knob, feeling like I'd walked into the wrong side of something. Then he moved. He didn't step back. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He walked past me into the bathroom. And the worst part is that he moved like I wasn't even there. Like he didn't have to push past my shoulder or avoid my feet. Like my body was not an obstacle. Like I was a shadow. He went in, turned, and clicked the lock. The sound of that lock snapping into place felt louder than it ever had before. It felt final. I backed away from the door like it had burned me. I stumbled out into the hallway, down the stairs, and into my room. I shut my door and sat on the edge of my bed, trying to calm down, trying to tell myself I was awake, trying to force my breathing to slow. But all I could see were his eyes, fixed on me in that hallway. Not angry, not confused, just aware in a way that didn't feel human. And he still hasn't made a sound. He's in my bathroom right now as I'm writing this. The light is still off. There's no fan, no running water, no movement I can hear through the door. Just that same heavy silence. Please, if anyone is reading this, I need help. What can I do? Because I don't think this is just my landlord using my bathroom anymore. I don't think it ever was. And after tonight, I'm not sure he's the one who's been waiting in the hallway all these nights. I'm starting to think he was waiting for me. Story 2. I've been seeing it for as long as I can remember. Not constantly, and not on everyone, but often enough that it became part of how I looked at people. It was always in the same place, on the inside of the right forearm, like a digital display pressed under the skin. Clear numbers, sharp edges, no blinking lights, no glow. Just a quiet countdown that didn't care whether I was staring at it or trying not to. When I was little, I assumed adults would explain it. That's what you believe when you're a kid, that grown-ups have answers tucked away for everything strange and scary. So I asked my parents. The first time, my mom smiled like I'd said something cute. She rubbed my arm as if checking for a rash and told me to stop making things up. The second time, she looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. The third time, my dad snapped. He didn't just brush it off. He got angry in a way that made my stomach twist. He told me people don't have clocks on their arms. He told me there was no such thing as numbers counting down on strangers. He said it like he was trying to hammer the idea into my head hard enough to break whatever part of me thought it was real. And the more I asked, the worse it got. I learned quickly what kids learn when they stumble into something adults don't want to deal with. Stop talking about it, stop asking, stop pointing. Because even if you're not lying, even if you know what you saw, the punishment comes anyway. Adults don't like mysteries they can't solve, and they like even less the thought that their child might be different. I knew what would happen if I told other kids I saw countdown clocks on some people's arms. I could picture the looks and the laughter. I could imagine the teacher calling my parents. I could imagine my parents getting that tight, worried look and saying words like imagination and attention-seeking, and then, eventually, therapy. So I practiced acting normal. I stopped staring at people's forearms. I learned to keep my eyes on faces, on shoes, on the ground. I learned to nod when adults spoke and to keep weird thoughts to myself. When the numbers showed up, I pretended they didn't. When I noticed them, I swallowed the words before they could leave my mouth. But pretending didn't make them go away. It just meant I carried it alone. For a long time, I didn't know what the numbers meant. I only knew they ran backward. They weren't like a watch showing the current time. They were like a timer ticking down towards something. I watched them in the same secret way you watch a dark window at night, half expecting something to appear in it. Sometimes I would see a set of numbers on an adult at a grocery store and then never see that person again. Sometimes I would notice it on someone we knew, and then it would just keep shrinking day after day, slow but steady. Not everyone had one. Most people didn't. That confused me. Why some and not others? I made guesses, like children do. Maybe it meant they were leaving soon. Maybe it meant they were moving away. Maybe it meant something bad would happen to them, like they'd break a bone or get sick. There were nights I lay awake, trying to connect it to anything. Birthdays, holidays, seasons, moon phases, nothing fit. Then I was 10, and I finally understood. We were visiting my grandmother. She lived in a small house that always smelled like dust and lavender and old paper. She had been slowing down for years, but that day she looked smaller than I remembered, as if her body was folding inward. Her hands trembled when she lifted her cup of tea. Her voice was still warm, but it came out thinner. I sat close to her on the couch, feeling the rough fabric under my legs, listening to the adults talk about weather and neighbors and medical appointments. I didn't understand most of it, but I understood the tone. They were trying to sound casual, trying not to admit out loud that something was changing. At one point, my grandmother reached over and patted my arm, and when she did, her sleeve slid back slightly. That was when I saw it. 364, 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. The numbers on her right forearm looked as real as anything I had ever seen. They weren't fuzzy or imagined. They were there, plain and undeniable. Days, hours, minutes, seconds. I stared until my eyes burned, and then I stared some more because a part of me was terrified that if I looked away, it would vanish and I'd be left wondering again. I watched the last digits shift. 364, 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 58 seconds. I didn't breathe. My heart started pounding like it was trying to escape my ribs. A full year. Something in my mind clicked into place, not with relief, but with dread. Because my grandmother wasn't moving away. She wasn't about to go on a trip. She wasn't about to start a new job. She was old and fragile and tired, and the adults were dancing around that truth like it was a fire. I remember sitting there, 10 years old, feeling like I had discovered a secret I was never meant to know. Like I had looked behind a curtain and seen the machinery that everyone else pretended didn't exist. I didn't say anything. I didn't point. I just watched my grandmother's face, her tired smile, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. I watched her arm when I could, counting backward in silence. I watched the adults in the room, none of them aware of what was written on her skin. A year later, she was gone. It happened exactly the way the numbers promised. Not around then, not close enough. Exactly. Down to the second. I wasn't even with her when it happened. My parents got the call early in the morning. I heard my mom's voice break through the wall like a sound from a dream. I heard my father's footsteps, fast and heavy. The house suddenly felt too bright, too sharp. Later that day, when we arrived at my grandmother's house, people were everywhere. There were quiet voices, hugs, cups of coffee nobody drank. I didn't understand all the words, but I understood the air. It had that thick, heavy feeling that only death brings. I didn't see the clock on her arm then. She was covered, but I didn't need to. In my head, I saw it reaching 0 and stopping. 0, 0, 0, 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. After that, the number stopped being a mystery and became a curse. I grew older, I went to school, got grades, made a few friends. I learned how to laugh at jokes, even when my mind was somewhere else. I graduated, I worked, I paid bills. On the surface, my life looked normal enough. Underneath, it never really was. Because sometimes in a crowd, I would catch sight of a countdown on someone's arm, and the world would tilt for a moment. I would feel sick with pity when the clock belonged to someone young, someone my age, or younger, someone who should have had decades. Seeing it on a teenager felt like a wrong note in a song. Seeing it on a little kid made me want to throw up. Other times, it was an old relative and the numbers felt almost expected, like the slow closing of a door everyone knows is coming. That didn't make it easier, but it made it less shocking. There was resignation in it, a quiet sadness I couldn't share with anyone because who would believe me? I never told a soul, not after my dad's anger when I was a child, and not after my grandmother proved what it meant. I carried it alone, like a private superstition. Except superstition doesn't come with a digital timer you can read down to the second. I tried to understand the rules. The clocks didn't appear on everyone, and they didn't appear far in advance. It was always about a year. Sometimes a little less if I met someone late in their countdown, but if I saw the first moment it appeared, it always started near the same point. 365 days, give or take. I even wondered about leap years. I remember noticing one February and feeling a strange, cold curiosity about whether anyone's clock would begin at 366. It didn't, as far as I saw. It always seemed to be a year as we think of it, simple and blunt. I searched online. I used every wording I could think of. Countdown on arm. Numbers on skin only I can see. Seeing death timer. I found fiction, comics, random forum posts, jokes. Nothing that matched what I was living with. No scientific explanation, no hidden condition with a name. No community of people who saw the same thing. So it stayed my secret. And like most secrets, it changed me. I started noticing things other people didn't. The way a man at a train station held his phone like it was the last time he'd ever touch it. The way a woman at a cafe smiled at her friend, unaware of the bright countdown on her forearm reading under 100 days. I became hyper-aware of how little time people might have without them knowing it. Sometimes I wanted to warn them, not because I thought it would help, but because the urge to say something, anything, can be overwhelming when you feel like you're watching someone walk toward a cliff with their eyes closed. But what would I say? Excuse me, your arm says you're going to die in 132 days. Have a nice afternoon. So I stayed quiet. I told myself it was better that way, that knowing wouldn't change anything, that it was none of my business, that I was saving myself from being labeled crazy. And for 20 years, that was how it worked. The clocks came and went. People lived and died. I tried not to think about how many of those deaths I had seen approaching. Then last year, everything broke. It was a Friday night. I remember because I had nothing planned and I was relieved about it. Work had been busy, the kind of busy where your brain keeps spinning even after you get home. I showered, ate something quick, and sat down on the couch, intending to watch something mindless until I fell asleep. At some point, I rubbed my forearm without thinking, an absent habit, and my fingers paused. My skin felt normal, no bumps, no heat, nothing strange. But my eyes dropped anyway, and there it was, on my own right arm, clear as printed ink under the skin. 365 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. For a moment, I just stared, waiting for my mind to correct itself. Waiting for the numbers to blur, to vanish, to reveal themselves as a trick of light or stress or exhaustion. I blinked hard. I rubbed my eyes. I looked away and looked back. They stayed. The last digits ticked down. 364, 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. Something in me went cold. Not fear like panic, but fear like empty space opening under your feet. I stood up too fast and nearly knocked over my drink. I walked into the bathroom and turned on every light. I leaned over the sink and held my arm under the brightest bulb. Still there, I watched the seconds change like a tiny guillotine dropping over and over again. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I think my body went straight into survival mode the way it does when something is too big to feel all at once. I started moving through the house without purpose, opening drawers, closing them, checking the lock on the door as if the lock had anything to do with this. Then I did the only thing I could think of that might make it stop feeling real. I drank. I found every bit of alcohol I had, beer someone left behind after a get-together, a bottle of wine I'd been saving, a half-empty bottle of something strong shoved in the back of a cabinet. I didn't pace myself. I didn't enjoy it. I swallowed like I was trying to drown the numbers. I kept thinking maybe it was a hallucination after all. Maybe I was finally snapping. Maybe in the morning I'd wake up and laugh, embarrassed and relieved. Maybe the clock would be gone and I'd tell myself I'd imagined the whole thing. I passed out on the couch. When I woke up the next morning, my mouth tasted like metal and my head felt split open. Sunlight came through the blinds in pale stripes. For a few seconds I forgot. Then I moved my arm. The clock was still there. And it was still counting. My stomach clenched so hard I gagged. I stumbled back into the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and looked again as if I expected it to have changed its mind overnight. It hadn't. And that should have been the worst moment of my life, realizing I had less than a year left and that the countdown was as real as gravity. But it wasn't. The worst moment came later that day, when I went out to buy water and painkillers, moving like an old man trying to act normal in public. The world outside looked exactly the same as it always did. Cars, people walking dogs, someone jogging with headphones in, a couple arguing quietly on a corner. Nothing felt different. Nothing looked like the start of an ending. I walked into a small shop near my place. The air conditioning hit my face, too cold. A little bell jingled when I entered. I grabbed what I needed and went to the counter. The cashier was a woman maybe in her 20s, tired eyes, hair pulled back. She scanned my items without looking up, the way cashiers do when they've been doing it for hours. When she reached for the receipt, her sleeve shifted. I saw her right forearm. My breath caught. She had a clock too. Not just any clock, a clock nearly identical to mine. Around 364 days, give or take a few minutes. At first I thought my hangover had turned everything into a nightmare, because in my whole life, I had never seen that many clocks at once. Usually it was one person here, one person there, rare enough that I could pretend I wasn't seeing a map of death all around me. But standing there, I became aware of the man behind me in line. I glanced down. A clock. The woman by the door holding a coffee. I looked. A clock. An elderly man shuffling past the window outside. I turned my head, heart racing. A clock. I paid without really understanding what I was doing, and walked out, my bag cutting into my fingers. The sunlight felt wrong. The sounds of the street felt too loud. My eyes started darting to every right forearm I could see. Every person had one. Old people, teenagers, middle-aged parents pushing strollers, a woman wearing business clothes and talking on the phone, a man with tattoos covering his arms, a kid holding an ice cream cone, face smeared with chocolate, clocks on all of them, no exceptions. And what made my skin prickle with a new kind of fear was how close they were to mine. Not identical, but close. None of them were off by more than a few minutes. It wasn't just me. It was everyone. That day, I went home and locked my door, not because I thought a lock could stop what was coming, but because I needed a boundary between myself and the street. I sat on my bed and watched the seconds fall. I refreshed news sites until my fingers hurt. I looked for anything, an alert, a rumor, a strange weather pattern, a scientific warning, a government statement, something that could explain why every human being seemed to have the same countdown suddenly stamped onto their body. There was nothing. The world was still arguing about politics. People were still posting vacation photos. Sports scores still mattered. Restaurants were still advertising weekend specials. Influencers were still selling skincare and clothes. No one was acting like they had 3 weeks left to live. I thought maybe I was the only one who could see the clocks, and that everyone else was walking around blind. That would fit with my life so far. I'd always been alone in it. But then, a worse thought came. What if others could see them too, and they were staying quiet the way I always had? What if millions of people were looking at each other's arms, and pretending not to. I tried to test it. I found excuses to glance at people's faces right after I looked at their forearms, searching for any sign, fear, confusion, anything. But people looked normal, annoyed, bored, cheerful, distracted. Nobody was staring at their own arms in horror. Nobody was screaming in the street. For days, I told myself I had to be missing something. Maybe the clocks didn't mean death this time. Maybe it meant a global event, some huge shift, some transformation. Maybe the world would change, but people would survive. Maybe the clocks were counting down to something else. But I couldn't make myself believe that. Not with what I knew. Not with my grandmother. And the clocks didn't stop. They didn't hesitate. They didn't slow down when I begged in my head for them to slow. They kept ticking like a metronome. As the months passed, I tried to live normally. I went to work. I answered emails. I attended meetings and listened to people complain about deadlines that suddenly felt like a joke. I sat across from colleagues and watched their countdowns drop below 200 days, then 150, then 100. Some nights I would go home and stare at my arm until I felt numb. Other nights I couldn't look at it at all and kept my sleeves pulled down even when it was warm. I traveled for work during that time, partly because my job demanded it, and partly because I needed to know if it was just my town, my country, my region. I needed some place on Earth where the clocks hadn't spread like a stain. I went to airports and hotels and conference centers. I walked streets in cities where I didn't speak the language well. I sat in taxis and trains and watched people's arms whenever I could do it without being obvious. It was the same everywhere, every person, always within minutes of my own countdown. The only difference was the small variations. Some people ahead of me by 2 minutes, some behind by 3. It felt like the whole species had been given a shared expiration date, slightly blurred at the edges. Now it's been almost a year since that Friday night. I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do. I've read every news source I can find, in every language I can manage to translate. I've looked for mentions of strange symptoms, mass panic, scientific warnings, religious prophecies, anything. I've searched for patterns in the dates. I've tried to figure out if the clocks always appeared 1 year before death, and why I could see them at all. There's nothing, no warnings, no announcements, no obvious disasters gathering on the horizon, no asteroid headlines, no supervolcano alerts, no global sirens. The world is running like it always has, right up to the edge of something it refuses to see. I know how this sounds. I know what it looks like on a screen. If I read this from someone else, I'd probably think it was fiction, or a cry for attention, or the writing of someone unraveling. But I also know what I've seen for 20 years, and I know the clocks have never been wrong. If anyone understands what I'm talking about, if anyone has ever seen anything like this, please tell me. Even if you don't have an explanation, even if all you can say is that you've seen them too. I don't want to sit here alone with this until the last number drops. I look at my right arm as I type, and the digits keep falling. 020, 12 hours, 37 minutes, and 44 seconds. 020, 12 hours, 37 minutes, and 43 seconds. Less than 3 weeks. Outside my window, a group of children walks past, their voices high and bright. They're coming home from somewhere. School, a park, a friend's house. The youngest one, maybe 4 or 5, is laughing as he teases the girl beside him. He pulls away from her in a little dance, proud of himself, completely carefree. For a second, I can almost pretend everything is normal, that they're just kids, that they have endless time, that the world will keep spinning the way it always has. Then his sleeve lifts as he swings his arm, and I see his right forearm clearly. 020, 11 hours, 58 minutes, and 18 seconds. 020, 11 hours, 58 minutes, and 17 seconds. My heart drops again, so hard it feels like it might crack something inside me. He keeps laughing. The clock keeps counting, and the sky above them looks perfectly ordinary. Story 3. My name is Thomas. I'm 34 years old. I live in a 1-bedroom flat on the edge of the city. The kind of place that always smells a little like wet concrete after it rains. I've worked at Sentinel Insurance for 9 years, and if you've ever wondered what it feels like to slowly disappear without anyone officially declaring you missing, I can tell you, it starts with routine. It starts with doing the same thing so many times that your life becomes a set of steps your body can follow even when your mind isn't fully there. I process claims. Cubicle 14B, 4th floor, beige carpet that still holds a faint burnt coffee smell no matter how many times they deep clean. Fluorescent lights that make everyone look a little sick. The job is exactly what you think it is. Scan the forms, tick the boxes, forward the file to compliance, and try not to make any mistakes because mistakes turn into meetings, and meetings turn into emails, and emails turn into someone asking if you're still a good fit. I'm not interesting. I know that. I've built my whole life around being harmless and predictable. Every Monday, I wear the same gray trousers because they're comfortable and because choosing something else feels like inviting attention. At 12:13, every day, I eat the same limp ham sandwich from the cafe downstairs, even though the bread always sticks to the roof of my mouth like it wants to glue my jaw shut. In the break room, there's a clock above the sink that runs 3 minutes fast, and everyone knows it, but nobody mentions it. It's one of those small office truths that becomes part of the air. We've all silently agreed that the clock is allowed to be wrong, and we are allowed to pretend it isn't. Nothing ever changed. That was the comfort. That was the deal I thought I'd made with the world. I'll keep my head down, I'll be easy to ignore, and in return, nothing will surprise me. Then last Tuesday happened. I arrived at 8:47 like I always do because I like walking in when the floor is already awake but not yet loud. I nodded at Petra from accounting in the hallway. She never nods back. She has this flat expression like her face is doing the minimum required to pass as human. And for years I've told myself she's just tired or unhappy or both. I dropped into my chair, logged in out of habit, and stopped. My monitor was already on. Not just on. Logged in, my desktop open, my claims system open, like someone had started my day for me. I stared at it, waiting for the normal feeling of annoyance to show up. It didn't. Instead, I felt a little pinch of cold at the base of my neck, the kind you get when you realize you left your front door unlocked, and you can't remember if you did it today or yesterday, or if it's always been that way. On the screen was a new email. No subject line. Sender was listed as compliance. Sentinel, which looked right at first glance, the way a fake looks right until you give it a second longer than it deserves. The message was short. Effective immediately. All employees will now report their dreams to the 7th floor. Failure to comply will result in retroactive non-existence. Thank you for your continued cooperation. I let out one laugh, not a real laugh, a short, ugly sound that surprised me as much as it did the guy in 14C, who glanced over like I'd coughed blood. I deleted the email, checked the trash folder, checked sent items like maybe I'd forwarded it to myself. I even clicked around the server log because I know just enough to make myself dangerous. It was gone. Fine, I told myself. Corporate spam gets weirder every quarter. Some compliance trainee trying to be funny. A phishing test. One of those security awareness things where they see if you'll click a link, and then you have to take a training module with cartoons. I tried to settle into the day. At 9:15, the printer in the corner started printing. Not forms, not claim summaries. Just blank white sheets, one after another, as if the printer had lost its mind and decided paper itself was the goal. People looked up. Someone said, "Is that yours?" And I shook my head. I walked over and pulled the tray open, expecting to see a jam. There was no jam. The machine was working perfectly, like it was doing exactly what it had been told to do. The pages weren't blank. Each sheet had a single line printed across the center in the exact policy font we use for everything at Sentinel. Same spacing, same sharp, clean type. You already dreamed this. Over and over. Hundreds of pages. Maybe 1,000. The stack rose like a small white wall. The printer never slowed. The sound was steady and calm. the confident rhythm of something productive. My hands started shaking so hard I couldn't grab the stack properly. When I tried, half the pages slid out and scattered across the carpet. I dropped to my knees to pick them up and ended up crawling under my desk, because for some reason being under the desk felt safer than standing in the open. The carpet smelled like old coffee and dust and something sour, like the inside of my gym bag after I stopped going. I hadn't thought about that smell in years, but there it was, and it made me want to gag. I gathered the pages in trembling arms and fed them into the shredder. The shredder made a sound that didn't match paper. It was a wet chewing noise, slow and thick, like it was grinding something softer than it should be. Then it died with a quiet pop, and the little overheat light came on, glowing red like an irritated eye. When I sat back down, the email was back on my screen. This time it had a subject line, Thomas L., Dream Report Due. I stared at it until the letters started to blur. My pulse was loud enough that it felt like noise in the room. I looked around, half expecting someone to be watching me, laughing, waiting for me to do something humiliating. No one was looking. Everyone was working in that normal office way that's almost a trance. Petra sat at her desk with her usual dead expression, but her hands weren't moving. They were just resting on the keyboard. Not typing, not clicking. Just sitting there like she'd forgotten fingers are supposed to do things. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? That the building was sending me threats? That the printer was accusing me of dreaming? That compliance had invented a 7th floor and it was going to erase me from time? By lunchtime, the fear had changed into something heavier, like it had settled into my chest and decided to live there. I found myself standing at the elevator without fully remembering walking there. I pressed the button and watched the doors close like it was all part of the plan. When the panel lit up, I saw something I didn't remember ever seeing. A button for 7. It hadn't been there yesterday. I was sure that I'd ridden this elevator for 9 years. I knew the buttons the way you know the freckles on your own arm. The new button glowed a soft red, almost embarrassed like it knew it wasn't supposed to exist and was hoping nobody would call it out. I pressed it. The elevator rose smoothly, too smoothly. My stomach didn't do that normal little lift you feel when you go up too fast. It felt like the elevator wasn't moving so much as the building was rearranging itself around me. The doors opened onto a hallway that looked exactly like the one on my floor, except the carpet was soaked. Not damp, not spilled on. Wet through, like the whole place had been flooded and then drained, and nobody bothered to dry it. My shoes made a weak squelching noise with every step. It was pathetic, that sound, and it made me instantly angry at myself for being there at all. I stood still for a long time, staring down the hallway, listening to the quiet and the soft, wet pressure under my soles. The smell was faint but unmistakable. Wet carpet, mildew, something old. It reminded me of stepping in dog shit on the way to my dad's funeral. I'd been rushing, late, trying to look like a proper son for once, and then my foot went into something soft on the sidewalk. I didn't have time to clean it. I sat through the service, smelling it, smiling and shaking hands, feeling like everyone could tell something about me was wrong. When people hugged me, I kept thinking, they can smell it. They can smell what I stepped in. At the far end of the 7th floor hallway was a single door. On it was a golden plaque, Dream Compliance. I knocked, no answer. I tried the handle. It turned easily, as if it had been waiting for me to stop pretending I had a choice. I stepped inside and stopped so suddenly my shoulders jerked, like I'd hit something invisible. I was in my own cubicle, cubicle 14B. 4th floor, same coffee stain on the carpet, same cheap desk, same monitor, same photo of my ex-wife that I keep telling myself I'll throw away, and then never do. Every detail was perfect, down to the little dent in the corner of the filing cabinet where I'd kicked it once during a phone call I shouldn't have taken at work. And I was already sitting there. Another me sat in my chair, facing my monitor, hands poised over the keyboard. He looked up when I entered, and he smiled the way I smile when I'm trying to make other people comfortable. When I'm trying to act like everything is normal, like nothing is wrong, like I'm not thinking about leaving the room and never coming back. "You're late with your report," he said. His voice was mine. His face was mine. His eyes were mine. But there was something about him that felt older, not in wrinkles, but in the way an object looks older after it's been used too long. Like a tool that's still functional but tired. I bolted. I didn't think. I didn't ask questions. I turned and ran down the wet hallway, my heart hammering so hard it hurt, my breathing loud in my own ears, my shoes squelching with every step. The walls started to look soft at the edges, like they might sag inward, like the building was losing its shape. The elevator doors were open when I reached them, which should have been impossible. The elevator should have been gone. It should have been somewhere else. I stumbled inside. The doors closed. And then I was back on 4, standing in front of the printer as if I had never left. I stared at my hands. My fingers were trembling. My knuckles looked too pale. The office looked normal. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone coughed. Someone laughed at something on their screen. The normal world was there, but it felt thin now, like paper held up to a light. The printer started again. This time it wasn't printing sentences. It was printing pictures. Not photos, not exactly. More like perfect detailed images drawn in ink, one page at a time. Each sheet a slice of something. My childhood bedroom. Blue wallpaper with little sailboats. The crack in the ceiling above the bed. The cheap dresser with the missing handle. The stupid nightlight shaped like a star that I was ashamed to still need when I was 9. The corner near the closet, where the shadows always looked too deep. One sheet came out with the top left corner of the room. Then another sheet with the top right. Another with the bed. Another with the window. Like the printer was building the room out of paper, piece by piece, insisting I see it. I just stood there watching. I don't know how long. Long enough for the warm pages to pile up against my shoes. Long enough for my brain to stop making thoughts and just become a wide blank space filled with that steady printing sound. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my balcony with a blanket over my shoulders and smoked the last 3 cigarettes I'd sworn I'd quit. I hadn't bought a pack in months. I don't even remember where they came from. Maybe they'd been in a drawer. Maybe they weren't mine. At some point, I realized I was crying a little, not sobbing, just leaking, like my face had decided it needed to do something physical to match the feeling in my chest. The city lights blinked in perfect unison, and once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. Not random flickers, not different buildings on different timers. All of them together, like the city was breathing as one huge organism. The traffic lights, the signs, the windows in office towers. On, off, on, a slow, steady pulse. I kept thinking about what my ex-wife used to say when she was still trying to be kind about it. She told me I lived like a ghost who was scared of his own apartment. At the time, I got defensive. I said she was being dramatic. I said she didn't understand stress. Sitting on that balcony, watching the city breathe, I thought she was probably right. Wednesday was worse. Every meeting now had an extra chair. It didn't matter if it was a quick stand-up at someone's desk. There was always one extra chair pulled up slightly too close, as if it was reserved for someone important. No one sat in it. No one acknowledged it, but it was always there. And the chair was always warm. I noticed it the first time because my knee brushed it when I sat down, and the heat through my trousers made my skin crawl. I looked around to see if anyone else reacted. Nobody did. They stared at their laptops, their notepads, their phones, smiling when it was their turn to speak, nodding at the right moments. During the 10 a.m. sync, Mr. Heller announced that quarterly targets were being adjusted upward by 300%. He said it in the calm voice managers use when they're delivering something cruel, but want you to accept it as normal. The strange part wasn't what he said. It was where he was looking. He stared at the empty chair the whole time as if it was the only person in the room who mattered, as if the chair was listening, judging, recording. Then, without turning his head, he asked me, Have you filed your non-existence paperwork yet, Thomas? A few people chuckled like it was a joke. Maybe they thought it was. I tried to laugh too. It came out wrong. Mr. Heller didn't smile. He just kept staring at the empty chair. At 14:30, the lights dimmed. Not like a power outage, not flickering. Just slowly dropping until the whole office looked bruised, like the world had been punched and was trying not to show it. The air tasted metallic, like a penny held under your tongue. The smell of burnt coffee got stronger, as if the carpet was warming up. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead against the glass. I stayed there for what felt like a long time, breathing fog onto it, wiping it away with my sleeve, breathing again. The glass was cold and steady, and that steadiness felt like the only honest thing left. Down below, the trams moved in total silence. No grinding, no rattle, no bell. They glided like they weren't touching the tracks at all. Except there were no tracks. The street had the usual lines and lanes, the usual worn markings, but the metal rails were gone, and the trams still moved, smooth and effortless, like the city had decided it didn't need the old rules anymore. That's when I felt it. Not a presence exactly, more like the shape where a presence should be, like negative space. Like when someone steps out of a room and you can still feel where they were standing. The office itself had noticed I was still here, and every time I tried to name what was happening, entity, hallucination, stress breakdown, my thought got gently crossed out inside my head and replaced with the next item on my to-do list. Forward this, close that, reply all. Schedule meeting. Like something was editing my mind the way compliance edits policies, removing anything that didn't fit the approved language. I walked back to my desk and opened a new email, hands shaking so badly my fingers hit the wrong keys. I typed the dream report because some part of me understood that resistance was pointless. I typed fast and messy, full of errors I didn't stop to fix. I dreamed the universe was a filing cabinet. One drawer was stuck. Inside it was me, still trying to close it, while my ex yelled at me and the whole thing smelled like burnt coffee and dog shit. I stared at it for a second, embarrassed by how childish it sounded, how gross, how specific. Then I hit send. The reply came instantly like it had been waiting behind the screen. Approved. Please report to the 7th floor for processing. When I looked up, the floor was empty. Not abandoned, not like people had gone to lunch. Erased. The cubicles were still there, the desks and monitors and chairs, but all the personal things were gone. No photos, no mugs, no jackets draped over chair backs, no little plants, no half-eaten protein bars, no piles of papers with scribbled notes. Just perfect clean stations, lined up like a showroom, humming with a quiet nothing. I stood and felt my legs move on their own, like I'd been given an instruction and my body was complying. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button. This time, only the 7th floor button worked. The rest of the panel was dark. I pressed 4 and nothing happened. I pressed lobby and nothing happened. My finger felt numb as I tried again and again, until I finally accepted that the elevator was no longer part of the building I thought I worked in. It was something else now, something with a single destination. The ride up felt longer, not in floors, but in distance, like I was traveling upward through a space that wasn't fully connected to the city outside. The doors opened, I stepped out, and I was standing in my childhood bedroom. Blue wallpaper with sailboats, the same window, the same dresser, the same stale, familiar feeling of being small and stuck. But the details were wrong in ways that made my skin tighten. The crack in the ceiling wasn't just a crack anymore. It had become a river of stars, bright points spilling through a dark line as if the ceiling had split open to space. The nightlight was still there, only now it was a black sun. It was dark, round, and somehow glowing at the same time, giving off a soft light that didn't feel like light. It felt like attention. On the bed sat the other me, legs crossed like he'd been waiting a long time. He held a single sheet of paper in one hand. He looked relaxed, like he belonged there, like he'd accepted whatever rules this place had and found a way to breathe inside them. "You're the last one," he said. His voice was mine, but it carried a weight I didn't have, like he'd spent years speaking into rooms that didn't answer. The rest filed their non-existence weeks ago. They're happier now. No more sandwiches. No more clocks. I sat beside him without really deciding to. The mattress didn't sink under my weight. It felt like sitting on something firm and dead, like the bed was just a shape, not an object meant for comfort. My mouth was dry. When I spoke, my voice sounded too loud in the small room. "What happens if I don't file?" I asked. He shrugged, casual, like we were talking about health insurance options. "Then you keep rolling. Forever. Conscious, aware. The only employee who still shows up." As I stared at the paper in his hands, it looked like a normal form, the kind we use for everything. A single sheet. White. Clean. It was blank, except for one thing. My signature. Already there. Already dry. I don't remember signing it. I don't remember holding a pen. But it was my handwriting, the same messy loop I've used since I was a teenager. The same way my last name trails off at the end, like I'm trying to escape my own letters. Outside the window, somehow both my childhood window and the fourth-floor office window at the same time, the city kept breathing, lights blinking in perfect sync, trams gliding without tracks. It should have been impossible to see the office district from my childhood street, but there it was anyway, layered over everything like two images printed on the same page. I took the paper from his hand. It felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, but in meaning. Like holding it was agreeing that it mattered. I folded it once and slid it into my pocket next to the cigarettes I no longer needed. The moment it touched the fabric, I realized I didn't want them anymore. The craving was gone, like that part of me had been quietly removed. I stood up. The other me watched with an expression that was almost gentle. Not friendly, exactly. More like he understood the kind of tired you get when you've been yourself for too long. I walked out of the room. I don't know where the door led. A hallway, an elevator, a space between places. The transition didn't feel like walking through a building. It felt like moving from one thought to another. Now I can hear the elevator humming. It's still going down. The sound is steady and calm, like it will keep going forever if nobody tells it to stop. I'm standing somewhere I can't fully describe, listening to it, feeling the vibration through the floor like a distant engine. I haven't decided yet whether I'll get off on 4 and go back to my desk and my sandwich and my fast clock and pretend I'm grateful for the chance to exist, or if I'll keep riding until the doors open onto whatever comes after non-existence. Either way, the report is filed. See you at the 10 a.m. sync. Story 4. I see his face through the midnight moon. I see him in my restless dreams in that silent December night, just staring. His eyes look dead, empty. His hair is long and ink black. His skin is pale white and wrinkled, like someone who has been in the ground too long. I'm writing this now like a shell of who I used to be, scared of what lives in the dark, scared of the thing that looks human, that looks like me, but isn't. It began on a cold night in late November. Rain tapped and slid down the outside walls of my house. And even indoors, there never seemed to be enough warmth. I was alone in my study trying to distract myself with old books. Strange volumes of history, folklore, and half-forgotten stories I'd collected over the years. The fire was low. The whole house felt too quiet, as if it were waiting. Then I heard a knock at the front door. At first I thought I had imagined it. Who would come that late, in weather like that? The knock came again, firm and patient, like whoever stood outside knew I would answer eventually. Who could that be at this awful hour? I muttered, forcing myself up from my chair. My body felt weak the way it often did. For years I had lived with an illness that sat in my lungs and chest like a stone. Some days I could ignore it. Other days it reminded me who was in charge. That night, even walking across my own house felt like wading through deep water. I reached the door and leaned in to look through the peephole. On the doorstep stood Dr. Toshenkov. He was an old acquaintance, someone I had known for a long time, someone I had trusted. In the city, people spoke his name with respect. He was one of those men who always seemed to be involved in important work, always one step ahead of everyone else. He was brilliant, confident, and strange in a way that had once seemed charming. He stood there in the rain without a coat, without an umbrella, as if the cold water running down his hair and shoulders didn't bother him at all. And he was smiling. It wasn't a wide grin. It wasn't even an obviously unpleasant smile. It was just wrong. It made my stomach tighten. I can't explain it better than that. Something about it felt like a secret. I should have left him out there. I should have told him to go home and come back in the morning. I should have listened to the part of me that wanted to step away from the door. But he was standing in the rain, and sympathy won. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The hinges complained with a long creak, as if the house itself didn't approve. "Dr. Toshenkov," I said, trying to sound calm, "what brings you here on such a miserable night?" He stepped forward like he'd been invited hours ago. Water dripped from his hair onto my entryway floor, but he didn't even glance down. "Ah, Smith, my friend," he said warmly, "I bring you wonderful news. I have developed something that will cure your illness for good. Let me in and I'll explain." Those words hit me harder than they should have. Cure. For good. The idea was so tempting, it felt dangerous all on its own. People had promised me improvements before, small comforts, new treatments, new medicines, new routines, but never a cure. Not like that. I let him in. I remember calling out for my staff, telling them to bring him towels, something warm, something to drink, anything to make him comfortable. My house has always been too big for one man, especially a sick one. So I kept servants. It sounds old-fashioned now, even to me, but it was my life. Toshenkov waved away the fuss. His smile stayed in place. "Do you need a drink?" I asked, trying to be polite, trying to treat this like a normal visit. "Not now," he said. "What I need to discuss is important." And as if my body wanted to remind me why this mattered, a cough rose suddenly in my chest. Violent, unstoppable. I turned away, embarrassed, and tried to cover my mouth, but it didn't help. My lungs seized. My throat burned. I hacked and wheezed until spots danced in my vision. When I finally pulled my hand away, there was blood on it. Not a lot, but enough. Enough to make my stomach drop, enough to make my hands feel cold and shaky. I muttered an apology and stepped away to clean myself up, to compose my face, to pretend this wasn't my reality. When I returned, I lowered myself into a chair and tried to breathe like a healthy man. Toshenkov watched me with the steady patience of someone observing an experiment. When he decided I was ready, he spoke. "Smith," he said softly, "that illness will not trouble you anymore. I have made an elixir, a cure. You drink it, and you will be well again. Not better, not improved." Well, I sat there in stunned silence, my mind trying to protect itself by refusing to believe him. An elixir, a cure. It sounded like something from the very books I collected. It sounded like fantasy dressed up as science. But the blood on my hand had been real. The weakness in my chest had been real. The fear that I was running out of time had been real for years. I looked at Toshenkov, searching his face for a joke, for a crack in the performance, for any sign that he wasn't serious. But he only smiled calm as ever, like a man presenting a gift. "That's quite an offer," I finally said. My voice was thin. "You're telling me this will cure me?" "Yes," he replied, as if the answer were obvious. "And it's safe?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly, like my doubt amused him. "Smith, do you not trust me? Would I ever bring you something unsafe?" In his eyes, I saw something that looked like honesty, something clean and simple. I wanted to believe it. I wanted it so badly that the wanting started to feel like its own kind of trap. I swallowed. "Then," I said, forcing the words out, "I'll try it." "Wonderful." He stood and produced a small glass, like a wine glass but thinner. From inside his coat, somehow dry despite the rain, he took a small bottle. The liquid inside looked ordinary enough, though it caught the firelight in a way that made it seem warm. He poured a shot-sized amount into the glass and held it out to me. When I took it, I felt heat through the glass, a pleasant warmth that made my fingers relax. The smell was sweet and fresh, like flowers in spring. It was almost comforting, like it belonged in the daylight, not in a cold house late at night. Tashenkov poured himself a glass of wine as if this were a celebration. He approached, raised his glass, and spoke like a man making a speech. "A toast," he said, "to your future health, to your happiness. Cheers." I raised the small glass and tapped it against his. The clink sounded sharp in the quiet room. Then I drank. The taste was nothing like the smell. It was bitter, harsh, and wrong. The kind of bitter that makes your throat tighten and your stomach turn. For a second, I thought I might gag. I forced it down anyway, too proud to spit it out, too desperate to ruin this chance. Tashenkov watched me carefully, still smiling. Not long after, he left. He stepped back out into the rain like he belonged to it, disappearing into the dark street, as if the night itself swallowed him. For a few days, I didn't think much about it. That's the truth. I waited for disappointment because disappointment had always come before. But the next morning, I woke up and realized something was different. My chest felt lighter. The constant pressure in my lungs, the weight I had lived with for years, was gone. I inhaled deeply, expecting pain, expecting resistance. But the breath came easily, smooth and full. I sat up in bed and laughed, a sound that surprised me because I hadn't laughed freely in a long time. It worked, I thought. It actually worked. For several days, I moved through life like a new man. I ate more, I walked more, I spoke with energy. Even my servants looked at me differently, like they didn't quite trust what they were seeing. Then, on the night of December 1st, sharp pain hit my stomach so suddenly I doubled over. It wasn't a normal ache. It felt like something twisting inside me, grabbing and pulling. I told myself I only needed rest. I went to bed early, around 8, and tried to sleep it off. When I woke before dawn, I found my bedroom window open. I know I had closed it. I remembered latching it, checking it. The winter air came through like a knife. My curtains stirred slightly in the draft. I stared at it for a long time, trying to understand how it could have happened. Eventually, I convinced myself it was wind, or a bad latch, or my own memory failing me. It was easier to accept a simple explanation. But that was the start. After that, small things began happening. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to and prove. Just moments that made me pause. I would walk into a room and feel strongly that someone had just been there. I would turn quickly, sure I'd catch a movement in the corner of my eye, and find nothing. I began to check behind doors, behind curtains, behind furniture, feeling ridiculous and unable to stop. At night, I sometimes woke up with the sense that I was being watched. Not the vague fear of a nightmare, something sharper, something that made my skin prickle and my breath catch. I would sit up and stare into the dark until my eyes watered. Each time I found nothing, and that almost made it worse. My mind started filling the quiet spaces with possibilities. The house had always been large, but it began to feel endless. Hallways seemed longer. Every soft noise felt like a footstep. By December 10th, the paranoia had turned into something close to panic. That night, the rain returned, but the storm was worse than before. The wind screamed outside, howling through the streets like an animal. The house creaked and shifted as if it were alive. Even in my study with the door closed, I could hear the weather throwing itself at the walls. I tried to focus on my books. I went back to the same old volumes of strange lore as if knowledge could protect me. I sat in my chair and forced my eyes over the lines, but I couldn't absorb a word because I felt it again. That sensation at the back of my head. The feeling of being stared at. Not imagined, not gentle. Focused. Patient. like someone waiting for me to notice. Slowly, carefully, I turned toward the window behind me, and I saw him. A man stood outside in the storm, close to the glass, unmoving, as if the rain didn't touch him. He looked like me. At first, the shock of that was so strong I thought my mind had broken. Same build, same face shape, same familiar expression. He even wore clothing like mine. But then the differences became clear and my stomach dropped. His hair was long and messy, hanging in wet black strands. His eyes were wrong, deep red, where mine were not, red in a way that didn't belong to any living person. His skin looked loose, like it didn't fit his body properly. It sagged in thick, uneven folds, swollen in places, as if it had been pulled and reattached. There were dark stains on it that could have been blood or something worse. Still, when he tilted his head, when he smiled, it was my smile. Terror ran through me so fast I didn't even think. A scream tore out of my throat, raw animal full of everything I'd been holding in for days. I stumbled back and ran for my bedroom. In my room, I yanked the curtain shut over every window with shaking hands. I didn't care if it looked insane. I didn't care if my servants would talk. I needed the outside gone. I needed the sight of him gone. But even with the curtains closed, I could hear him. Footsteps outside, not heavy, not rushed. A soft clicking sound against concrete, slow and calm, moving along the outside of the house like he had all the time in the world. I stood there sweating, breathing hard, trying not to make a sound. Then I remembered the old double-barreled shotgun hanging above the mantelpiece. It had been in the family for generations. More decoration than tool, but I knew it still worked. Somewhere under my bed, I kept shells. I'd never thought I would need them. I dropped to the floor and moved slowly, careful not to make noise. The house felt too loud. The storm, the creaks, my own breathing. Every time the clicking footsteps shifted, I froze completely, holding my breath until it seemed safe again. It took forever to reach the mantelpiece. My arms and legs felt weak, but fear pushed me forward. I reached up, inch by inch, and wrapped my fingers around the barrel. And then, everything went wrong. Dust, thick from years of disuse, puffed down into my face. It went into my nose. I tried to fight it, tried to hold it back, but my body betrayed me. I sneezed, loud, sharp, impossible to hide. Outside, the clicking stopped. For a single heartbeat, there was silence. Then I saw his shape move, fast, inhumanly fast, turning toward my window like a predator locking onto prey. Before I could react, the window exploded inward. Not from a thrown rock, not from a tool. His fist went straight through it. Glass flew across the room. Shards buried themselves in his hand and forearm, and he didn't even flinch. He climbed through the broken frame like it was nothing, like the laws of pain didn't apply to him. In his other hand, he held a knife, long and bright, the kind of sharp that looks too clean. He charged toward me without hesitation. I dropped the shotgun. My hands went numb. My mind emptied out. I couldn't lift the weapon again. I couldn't run. I couldn't even scream. I stood there like a child caught doing something wrong, frozen in the worst moment of my life. My voice came out broken. "Don't you have a mind?" I managed. "What are you?" The thing stopped mid-charge, as if my words amused it. It stood in the darkness near the window, rain blowing in around it, its face half hidden in shadow. When it spoke, its voice was a dry rasp, like something that hadn't used its throat in a long time. "Another you," it said. My breath caught. My stomach turned. "Another me." The words made no sense, and yet they fit the nightmare perfectly, like the final piece of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. I don't remember falling, but I must have, because the next thing I knew I was outside, in the rain. The storm slammed into me. The drops stung like thrown gravel. My clothes clung to my skin. I stood there shaking, trying to understand how I'd gone from my bedroom to the yard, like I'd been dragged out of myself and dropped somewhere else. Then I saw a light. For a moment, I thought it meant safety. A neighbor's lamp, a passing car, anything human. But the light came from a window, my own house, glowing from within. I stepped closer, drawn like someone walking toward a voice calling their name. I pressed my face to the cold glass and looked inside, and I saw my study. The room looked exactly as I had left it. The books, the chair, the firelight. At the desk sat a man, me. He was calm, reading the same volumes, moving his eyes over the pages like nothing in the world was wrong. Then I watched him cough horribly, doubling over as blood spilled into his hand. My breath failed. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. It was me, not a copy, not an illusion. Me as I had been before. Then a knock sounded at the front door. The man in the study, me, stood up. "Who could that be at this awful hour?" he said in my own voice. He walked down the hallway. He leaned to the peephole. And standing outside the door, soaked in rain and smiling, was Dr. Tashenkov, smiling like he already knew exactly what would happen next. Story 5. I had never done the school run before. Monday to Friday, work swallowed most of my life, and my wife usually handled mornings without even making it look difficult. But in the last week of the summer holidays, her mother passed away. Everything after that happened fast. My wife went down south to be with her dad, help plan the funeral, do all the things that somehow still need doing when you're already falling apart. And that left me at home, trying to keep everything steady. I won't pretend I'm fine. I miss her constantly. The house feels wrong without her moving around in it, without her voice calling up the stairs, without her asking if I remembered to pack the right snack or sign the right form. Still, there was a small, quiet part of me that was grateful for the forced change. It's been years since I spent this much one-on-one time with Hilda. Hilda is 6, and she's the kind of kid that makes adults pause and actually listen. She looks like her mother so much it's almost painful sometimes, especially when she pulls a certain face or says something in that exact tone that only my wife has. It isn't just her looks either. She has the same sharp humor, the same way of reading people. Like she's always paying attention to things no one thinks she notices. Sometimes she says something that makes me forget she's a child. With me at work most days and Hilda being an only child, it makes sense that she and my wife have always been especially close. Holidays, weekends, evenings, those were their times. I was there, but I wasn't always present the way I should have been. That truth sits heavier lately. So when the first morning of school came, it was me and Hilda in the car together. Just us. Her backpack looked too big for her shoulders. She was bouncing slightly in her seat, full of that nervous energy kids get when something is exciting but unfamiliar. Hilda was happy to give me directions as I drove, even though I obviously knew the way. I played along because she looked so proud each time she pointed out something important, like she was guiding an explorer through dangerous territory. "Okay," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "So this is your first day of year 2. She turned in her seat and frowned at me. I didn't even need to look over to know exactly what face she was making. "What?" I asked, trying not to laugh. "It's year 3, actually," she said, very calm, like she was correcting a toddler. "No way. When did you get old?" That made her smile. She didn't answer, just turned back to the window like she was above the whole conversation, watching houses go by as if she had important thoughts. A moment passed in comfortable silence. Then, in that careful way she has when she wants to talk about something that matters, she said, "Daddy?" She says my name first, then waits for me to respond as if we're on a phone call and she needs to make sure I'm still there. I've told her over and over that she can just start talking, that I'm listening, but it never seems to stick. It's sweet, and sometimes it makes me feel guilty, like she learned that habit because she wasn't always sure I was paying attention. "Yes, love, was it dangerous when you went to school?" That question caught me completely off guard. For a second, I couldn't even find the right tone. "Dangerous?" I repeated. "Yeah," she said. then paused like she was building up to something big. Because of the dinosaurs. She burst into laughter at her own joke, loud and proud, and it hit me like medicine. The sound of her laughing like that, carefree and bright, made my chest loosen. I laughed too, shaking my head. Very funny, I said. Are you looking forward to your first day back? Yeah. Kids are incredible. They can answer like they've given you everything. Like that single word is the whole story, and then they'll switch topics like nothing happened. I tried again. What are you looking forward to the most? She went quiet and stared out the window, and I could almost hear her thinking, weighing the options, deciding what mattered enough to say. Playing with my friends, she said finally. Then her face lit up as she remembered something else. Oh, and my new teacher is Mrs. Gibson. Layla says she's the best. Layla is Hilda's cousin on my wife's side, a year older and full of confidence. If Layla decided a teacher was the best, Hilda would accept it as fact. That's good, I said. Won't you miss your old teacher? She was the worst teacher. The way she said it, with that absolute certainty, sent a sharp little sting through me. My daughter had spent a year with the worst teacher, and I'd never even known there was a problem. I'd been too busy, too tired, too absent. How was she the worst? I asked gently, watching the road but listening closely. She was always cross, Hilda said. She didn't like fun. She told me off when I cried. Oh, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. That's not very nice. Then, as if she'd been waiting for the right moment to share something exciting, she leaned forward a little and lowered her voice, like she was telling a secret. On the last day of school, I played a trick on her. She giggled to herself and gave me a quick, mischievous look, the exact look my wife gives when she's about to say something she knows she shouldn't. That's so, I said, pretending to sound stern, but I couldn't hide the smile. It was Charlie's idea, she rushed on, eager to explain. We were in the art hut, and she went in the cupboard where the pens and paper are, and I locked the door. I laughed because it sounded like the kind of harmless kid trouble every school has. I even remember doing something similar when I was younger, locking a mate in a supply closet for a few minutes until a teacher found him and we all got detention. Stupid, but you little menace, I said, still amused. Did she get out? Hilda didn't answer that part. She just smiled again and looked out the window, as if the story was finished. Then she suddenly pointed forward, leaning into her seatbelt. That way, she sounded so proud of herself, as if she'd just saved us from driving into a river. The road she pointed down led straight to the school, which I'd seen coming for ages, but I nodded like I'd nearly missed it. Good spot, I said. School drop-off was chaos. My wife had complained about it plenty of times, but actually being in it was something else. Cars were squeezing into spaces that didn't exist. People were stopping in the middle of the road with hazard lights flashing like that made it acceptable. Parents were half out of their vehicles shouting last-minute reminders through windows. There were kids weaving through it all like little drunk pedestrians. I parked as close as I could to the gates, which still wasn't close at all. The best spot I could find was far enough away that it felt like we were walking from another town. Hilda didn't mind. She was practically skipping. I walked her down the pavement and to the school gate. I crouched to her height and gave her a big hug, the kind of hug that lasts a second longer than necessary, because the truth is, I didn't want to let go. I kissed her forehead, smelling her shampoo and that clean, warm kid smell that always makes me feel protective. Have a great day, I said. I will, she chirped. And then she ran off to join a line of other kids about her size. I stood there for a moment and watched her. She found her friends quickly, already talking with her hands, smiling, looking totally at home. There was something comforting about seeing her blend right in, like she belonged to a world I didn't fully understand, but could still recognize as safe. My eyes drifted to the teachers. They looked stressed, not the busy but cheerful look schools try to put on for parents. They looked tense, impatient, like they'd already had enough and the day hadn't really started yet. They weren't even pretending to be happy to be back. Hilda glanced over and saw me watching. I waved. She waved back, then she turned away and continued chatting, and I started walking back down the pavement toward my car. A group of mums were gathered ahead, blocking most of the walkway. 2 pushchairs had formed a kind of barricade, forcing people to step into the road to get past. They were close together, heads tilted in, the posture of serious conversation or serious gossip. I wasn't trying to listen, but as I got nearer, I caught pieces of what they were saying. Mrs. Baker didn't show up to teach the Year 2s. She's not answering her phone or anything. I heard she wasn't at the teacher training day either, and she says she hasn't seen her all summer. I slowed down without meaning to, and then I stopped completely. Mrs. Baker, Hilda's teacher last year, the one she'd just called the worst. A cold wave went through me so sudden it made me feel unsteady. My first thought was simple. Something happened to her. Then my second thought, much darker, arrived right behind it. The cupboard, the art hut, the last day of school. I turned around and looked back toward the school gates. The children were gone inside now. The playground was emptying. The teachers were guiding the last stragglers through the doors. I didn't think. I just started walking back, faster than I meant to, my legs feeling strangely weak. By the time I reached the entrance, my breathing was too quick, like my body had started panicking before my brain could decide if it was reasonable. I stepped into reception and forced myself to put on a normal face. The receptionist was sitting behind the desk with that overbright school smile, the kind that's meant to be comforting. H. High, I said. My voice came out thin. I'm Hilda's dad. She left her coat in the art hut before the summer holidays. My wife asked me to get it back. Yes, of course, the receptionist said, cheerful and smooth. It's just around the left side of the building. It's not been opened yet, so here's the key. Just drop it back when you're done. You can leave it open. I took it, muttered a thank you, and walked out. It's a coincidence, I kept telling myself. It has to be. Teachers go missing for reasons that have nothing to do with children's stupid pranks. People move. People get sick. People have breakdowns. People disappear because their lives are complicated in ways kids can't understand. But my stomach didn't believe any of it. The art hut was around the left side of the main building, tucked slightly away like an afterthought. It was one of those temporary classrooms, almost like a static caravan, but cheaper, more basic. The walls had a rough, pebbled texture painted navy blue. The roof was flat, covered with felt. It looked like it had been dropped onto the playground by a helicopter and forgotten. As I approached the door, the keys jingled loudly in my hand. My grip was unsteady. I felt like I was walking toward something I'd already seen in a nightmare. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The smell hit me first. Not a strong smell, just that stale, shut-up scent of a room that hasn't been opened in weeks. Warm dust and old paper and dried paint. The kind of smell that should have been harmless. Sunlight slanted through the windows, thick with floating dust motes that drifted in slow spirals. The room looked exactly like you'd expect after a summer break. Tables pushed slightly out of place. Art supplies stacked and left behind. Bits of colored paper on the floor. My eyes moved quickly, scanning without permission. And then they landed on the teacher's desk. A handbag sat on top of it. Not tucked away, not in a cupboard, not taken home. Just sitting there like someone had set it down for a moment and fully intended to come back. My mouth went dry. Hilda's voice echoed in my mind, cheerful and proud. On the last day of school, I played a trick on her. She went in the cupboard where the pens and paper are, and I locked the door. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight. I turned and looked for the storage cupboard. There were a few, but one door stood out immediately, taller than the others, tucked into the corner where it would be easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. The kind of cupboard kids get sent to fetch things from. The kind of cupboard that can fit an adult if they bend down. I walked toward it slowly. My feet barely seemed to lift from the floor. My whole body felt wrong. like it knew what was coming and was trying to slow me down. I reached for the handle. The cupboard door was locked. A thin, desperate sound escaped me before I could stop it. "Please, no," I whispered. My mind scrambled for other explanations. Someone locked it after checking it. Someone left supplies inside. Maybe it's locked as standard. Maybe the key is elsewhere. Maybe the lock is broken and stuck. But the fear was bigger than logic now. It was in my skin. I touched the latch. The door swung open by itself. For a split second, there was only darkness inside, like the cupboard was swallowing the light. Then something shifted forward with the motion of the door. The sound came first, a wet, heavy thud against carpet. Then the smell. It was immediate and violent, like the air in my lungs turned to poison. I gagged and stumbled backward, my hand flying to my face. My stomach heaved. I couldn't stop it. Vomit spilled through my fingers, hot and sour, splattering the floor. I tried to look away. I couldn't. A body had been pressed against the door from the inside, and opening it had let her fall. Mrs. Baker was curled in on herself, knees drawn up like a child trying to make herself small. Her skin was brown and tight, stretched across bone, dried and pulled in a way that made her look less like a person and more like something left out in the sun. Her white summer dress was stained in large, ugly patches, yellow and brown, soaked and dried and soaked again, like her body had simply done what bodies do when they're trapped too long. Her hair was stuck to her head in limp strands. Her face was turned partly down, but I could see enough. I knew immediately she hadn't been dead for a day, or two, or even a week. She'd been there the whole time, the last day of term. The cupboard. The lock. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall behind me. I couldn't feel my hands properly. Everything inside my chest felt like it was collapsing. My brain tried to protect me by doing strange things. It offered up images that didn't match reality. It tried to rewrite the memory into something softer. Maybe she got in there later. Maybe she locked herself in. Maybe someone else locked it after Hilda did. Maybe she was found and put back. Maybe... But none of it worked. Because the handbag was still on the desk. Like she never left. Because the mums outside said no one had seen her all summer. Because the cupboard was locked from the outside. Because my daughter told me, smiling, like it was a silly little prank, that she had locked the door. And because a 6-year-old wouldn't understand what an adult understands, that a locked cupboard isn't funny if no one opens it again. A sound came out of my throat, and I realized I was crying. Not quiet tears, ugly, helpless sobs that made my whole body shake. I tasted bile. I tasted panic. My vision blurred and the room warped at the edges. I stumbled backward out of the art hut into daylight, and the brightness made it worse, made everything feel unreal. I sucked in air in sharp, shaking breaths like I'd been underwater. What would I say? What could I possibly say? I kept seeing Hilda's face, her proud little grin when she told me about the trick. Sweet, innocent, thinking she was sharing a funny memory with her dad. She had no idea. She couldn't have. She's a child. She locks a door and then runs off to play, assuming the world stays safe because the world is supposed to be safe. But the consequence was sitting in that cupboard, curled on the floor. And now I was holding the key that proved the room hadn't been opened. I was standing here as the first adult to see it, the first person who could connect the story. If I tell the truth, everyone will know. They'll ask questions. They'll ask who locked the cupboard. They'll ask why. They'll ask whether the teacher called out, whether anyone heard. They'll ask who was last seen near the art hut. They'll ask about the last day of school. And even if Hilda isn't blamed legally, even if everyone agrees she's too young to understand, people will still look at her differently. They'll whisper. They'll say her name like it tastes bad. Kids can be cruel. Adults can be worse. One sentence from the wrong parent in the wrong tone could follow her for years. And what would it do to Hilda if she ever found out? I pictured her older, old enough to understand, realizing that a moment she laughed about as a trick ended with someone dying alone in the dark. I pictured her trying to carry that knowledge through her life. I pictured her turning it into something monstrous inside her, something she could never fully put down. If I lie, if I pretend I just happened to discover the body while looking for Hilda's coat, then what? They'll still ask questions, they'll still trace things back. How did I know to check the cupboard? Why did I have a key? Why was I even there? Why that morning? Why not any other time? Why did I come back right after drop-off? And even if my lie holds for a while, it won't hold forever. All it takes is one person remembering a child's joke, one child telling another child, one offhand comment from Hilda about locking Mrs. Baker in the cupboard, and the whole thing collapses. My thoughts went in circles so tight I felt dizzy. I kept repeating the same words in my head, like if I said them enough times, they'd turn into a plan. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Inside the building, children were starting their first day back. Parents were leaving. Teachers were forcing smiles. The day was moving forward like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something that couldn't be undone. And I was standing outside the art hut with vomit on my hands, shaking in the morning sun, trying to figure out how to protect my daughter from a truth that might destroy her, while knowing there was no way to erase what had been done. Because the worst part wasn't just that Mrs. Baker was dead. The worst part was how long she'd been waiting in the dark for someone to open that door. Story 6. Even while I'm typing this, part of me feels like I've finally lost it. Most people reading this won't know what I'm talking about. And honestly, I hope you never do. But if the name Sparky the dog means anything to you, if it pulls up even a tiny spark of childhood warmth, stop here. Close the tab. Clear your browser history. Get up and make a cup of coffee. Do something normal. Let your day swallow this before it has time to stick. And whatever you do, don't go digging through your memories for that show. Don't try to remember the theme song. Don't picture the rainbow fence. Don't test yourself to see if you can still hear that voice. Just bury it, put it somewhere deep, and lock the door. For everyone else, I'm sorry. I don't know how to tell this story in a way that makes sense. I only know what happened to me, and I know what I heard on the phone. I grew up in the early 80s, back when local broadcast stations still mattered, and cable was something only a few families had. You didn't have 100 channels. You had whatever your antenna could pull in, and that was that. Back then, I had one obsession, and it was so intense it felt like a religion. Every morning at exactly 7 o'clock, I'd beg my parents to put on the channel that carried Sparky. I never even learned the station's real name. It honestly didn't matter. To me, it wasn't a station. It was a door, and every morning at 7 o'clock, it opened. The moment that jingle started, I'd feel my whole body go calm. Sparky would bounce onto the screen from behind a wooden fence painted in bright rainbow colors. Every plank a different shade, loud and cheerful in that cheap TV way. He had big floppy ears and a wide, dumb grin that made him look like he trusted everyone in the world. When Sparky was on, nothing else mattered. The house could have been falling apart around me, and I would have sat there, cross-legged on the carpet, staring like the screen was keeping me alive. Every episode followed the same routine. It always started with a close shot of that rainbow fence. Sparky would slowly peek out from behind it, like he was sneaking up on the audience. He'd click his teeth together with that strange little sound, clack, 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 then tilt his head and ask in his high, scratchy voice, "Hey there, kids. How you doing this morning?" Then the camera would pull back and you'd see the man standing next to Sparky, a real person, not a cartoon. He always wore this outdated light green tuxedo that looked like it belonged at a low-budget wedding. He was older, maybe in his 40s, with thinning black hair and the kind of tired face you only notice as an adult. As a kid, I just thought he looked nice. I think his name was Mr. Wilson, or maybe Jefferson. I'm not completely sure anymore. The details blur when you've spent decades trying not to think about something. Sparky would always turn toward him and ask, in the same bright voice, "So, Mr. Wilson, what are we doing today?" And the man would clap his hands once and give this big, practiced smile like he was performing for a crowd of 1,000 instead of a cheap local camera. Well, Sparky, today we're going to learn about counting. Or today we're going to do some gardening. Sometimes it was shapes. Sometimes it was colors. The kind of simple, harmless stuff public TV could crank out on a small budget. If you describe it, it sounds boring. Even back then, there were better cartoons, better shows, bigger characters. But I never changed the channel. Not once. Sparky had a pull on me that felt personal. Like the show was made for me alone. Like Sparky saw me sitting there and was happy I'd shown up. And then Halloween happened. That episode is the one part I'm sure about. I remember it because it didn't air at the usual time. Instead of the 7 a.m. slot, it came on late in the evening. I remember being excited and nervous because it felt like I was being allowed into something special. I was sitting on the floor in a cheap superhero costume my mom had grabbed from a discount bin at the supermarket. The kind that came in a thin plastic bag with a flimsy mask and a cape that never sat right. I had candy on the table next to me and my whole body felt wired from sugar and excitement. The set looked the same, but the energy was different. They were doing spooky stories, the watered-down kind meant for kids. Ghost tales that were more silly than scary, just creepy enough to make you squirm and laugh. Sparky had his paws over his eyes, peeking through his fingers and giggling in that nervous way puppets do. I remember thinking it was perfect. Then, without warning, Mr. Wilson turned his head sharply to the side, like he'd heard something. He stared off camera with a look I'd never seen on him before. Not the friendly host face, something tight and real. At that exact moment, Sparky went completely limp. Not like a puppet playing dead, not like a character fainting. His whole body sagged as if the life had been cut from it. He slumped against the fence, head hanging at a wrong angle, mouth open in that painted smile that suddenly looked like a trap. The voices in the studio got muffled. The audio wasn't clear, but even as a kid, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. It was that sudden shift you feel when adults stop acting and become serious, when the room changes temperature without anyone touching the thermostat. Mr. Wilson's face twisted like he was trying not to cry. He stepped closer to the fence, and another man slowly rose into frame from behind it. The puppeteer, I assumed. I'd never really thought about who was behind Sparky's voice before, but there he was, half visible, moving like his legs didn't work right. Then I heard the scream. It wasn't a TV scream. It wasn't acting. It was raw and cracked and full of panic, like something had been ripped out of him in a single second. No, Franklin, no. I told her not to. He cut himself off, and then he turned and ran off the set. Mr. Wilson went after him immediately, calling out, chasing him in that stiff tuxedo like none of it was planned. The camera didn't cut away. That's what still gets me even now. If it had cut, if it had gone to a commercial break with a quick fade, maybe my childhood brain would have filed it under weird TV glitch and moved on. But the camera stayed right there, right on Sparky. The puppet was still slumped against the rainbow fence, mouth frozen open, eyes staring ahead. And I swear, this is the part that makes me want to tear my own skin off when I think about it. I swear I saw something dark start to seep out from between Sparky's teeth. Thick and slow, like tar. Not bright red, not like fake blood. Darker than that, wrong. And then, abruptly, it cut to commercials. No explanation, no apology, just happy ads and upbeat music like nothing had happened. After that night, the show disappeared. As a kid, it felt like years. Every morning at 7 o'clock, I'd flip to the channel with this pathetic, stubborn hope that Sparky would be there again. Nothing. Just other programs or static. The world continued like it always did, but my mornings felt empty, like a routine had been cut out of my life. If I'm being honest, it was probably only a few months. But time is different when you're small. A few months can feel like a lifetime when you're waiting for something you can't explain to anyone. Then one random morning it came back. I remember the excitement hitting me so hard I could barely breathe. I ran to the TV, sat down too close, ready for that jingle and that rainbow fence and Sparky bouncing into frame like everything was fine again. But when the picture came on, Sparky wasn't there. A skinny man stood alone in the middle of the set. He had slicked back black hair and a thin mustache that looked fake, like it had been slapped onto his face at the last minute. He was wearing the same light green tuxedo, but it hung off him in a way that made it look borrowed, like it belonged to someone bigger, someone who was supposed to be standing there. The man looked into the camera and tried to smile. "Hey, kids," he began, and his voice shook. He kept glancing off to the side like he was being watched. He wiped at his nose and eyes with his sleeve, like he couldn't keep himself together long enough to finish what he needed to say. "Sparky is taking a little vacation." He forced another smile, but it looked painful, like the muscles didn't want to cooperate. "He wanted me to thank all of you for the wonderful journey you took together. But someone really important to him has left, a great, great friend of his." He stopped and swallowed hard. His eyes were red and hollow in a way that didn't belong in a kid's show. Then he looked straight into the camera. "See ya, kids." He stood up slowly, turned around, and walked off the set without another word. The camera stayed on the empty studio. No music, no laugh track, no credits, just silence and that ugly dead space where the show used to live. It stayed like that for almost a full minute before the screen faded to black. My mom told me later that I didn't move after that. She said I sat there on the carpet, perfectly still, staring at the TV as it turned to static. I didn't blink. My eyes got bloodshot. I looked like I'd shut down, like someone had pulled a plug inside my head. My dad eventually had to grab me and physically pull me away from the screen. Even then, I barely reacted. I wasn't crying. I wasn't screaming. I was just gone. It might sound dramatic, but it was the biggest shock of my childhood. Not because a TV show ended, but because something about the way it ended felt like I'd been abandoned by something that had been real to me. And what stuck with me wasn't just the loss of Sparky. It was Halloween night, the limp puppet, the scream, the dark liquid. The way the camera didn't cut, like whoever was running it was too stunned to remember they were supposed to. As I grew up, that question stayed lodged in my brain like a splinter. What actually happened? When I was old enough, I started digging. At first, it was casual. I'd bring it up in conversations with old friends, people who grew up in the same area. Most of them gave me blank looks. A few thought it sounded familiar, but couldn't place it. Some laughed and said I must be mixing it up with another show, but I wasn't. So I went deeper. I called local stations that might have aired it. I asked about old morning blocks, old children's programming, canceled public access shows. I checked library archives, microfilm reels, old broadcasting schedules, anything I could think of. Nothing. It was like Sparky the dog had never existed. No tapes, no listings, no merchandise, no fan clubs, no articles, nothing you'd expect to remain from even a small, forgotten local show. Not even proof that the actors were real. That should have been the end of it. A normal person would have accepted that memory is messy and childhood gets things wrong. But then I found one small lead, a newspaper clipping from that same year. A tiny announcement about a children's event. Meet the creators and stars of your favorite morning show at an elementary school a couple towns over. There was a date, a time, and a grainy black and white photo of two men standing next to a fence that looked a lot like the one from the show. The article didn't say Sparky by name, but I knew that fence the way you know the layout of your childhood bedroom. Even faded and blurry, it felt like a fingerprint. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I drove to that elementary school. It looked like every other school. Brick walls, faded playground equipment, a flag out front. I went inside and asked staff members if they'd ever heard of a Sparky the Dog event from the early 80s. Most of them looked at me like I was trying to prank them. Some were too young to have been there at the time. A few older teachers shrugged and said they didn't remember. Then an older secretary at the front desk, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, narrowed her gaze like she was studying me. She didn't laugh. She didn't ask what I meant. She just nodded slowly like I'd said something she'd hoped she'd never hear again. She disappeared into a back room and came back with a faded slip of paper. A phone number was written on it in shaky handwriting. No name, no note. Just the number. I thanked her, walked back to my car, and stared at those digits for a long time. They felt impossible, like a message from a past that didn't want to be found. I didn't expect it to work. 40 years is a long time. Numbers change. People move. Lines get disconnected. I told myself I'd dial and hear that dead tone, and then I could finally let it go. My hands were shaking as I punched the numbers in. The line picked up after 2 rings, and in my ear, that jingle spilled out like cold syrup. Bright, bouncy piano notes, exactly the same as I remembered. Not a remixed version. Not a recording that sounded old. The same. Then the voice came through. "Hiya, kids. How you doing this morning?" I nearly dropped the phone. My throat went dry so fast it felt like I'd swallowed sand. I hadn't heard that voice in over 30 years, but it yanked me right back to being a kid in pajamas, sitting too close to the TV, believing the world was safe because a puppet was smiling at me. I couldn't speak. I tried, but my tongue wouldn't move. After a few seconds of silence, Sparky spoke again, and his tone changed. It got softer, almost gentle, like he was talking to a child who'd scraped their knee. "Aw, what's the matter, buddy? You sound upset. Did something bad happen?" The word buddy made my skin crawl. He said it like he knew me, like he remembered me. I finally forced air into my lungs. "This has to be a joke," I said, but it came out weak, like I was asking permission to believe it. "A joke," Sparky snapped, suddenly offended. "Absolutely not. We missed our morning friend. We really want to see you again." I started, but my voice caught. "We are all waiting for you," Sparky said, and for a second it almost sounded sweet. That was worse than the anger. Sweetness can hide anything. My grip tightened on the phone. "Is Mr. Wilson there?" The line went quiet, not like a normal pause. It felt heavy, like something was standing too close to the receiver, listening. Then Sparky answered, and his voice went flat and distant. "He is always here." And just like that, the bright cartoon tone snapped back into place like someone flipping a switch. "Come visit us, okay? We kept the rainbow fence and everything. I'll tell you all about Halloween night. I'll tell you what really happened. Just come see us." Then he gave me an address, slow and careful, like a teacher dictating to a student. A rural route number in the middle of nowhere, nearly 2 hours away. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely write it down. I kept telling myself I shouldn't do this. I kept telling myself no good thing has ever started with a phone call that shouldn't exist. "See you soon, buddy," Sparky whispered. The line went dead. I don't know what pushed me into the car. Curiosity, obsession, stupidity. Maybe some part of me was still that kid on the carpet, still hoping the show would come back and everything would make sense. I drove like I never had before. I didn't stop for food or gas or anything that would break the spell. I just followed rural roads that got narrower and emptier, cutting through fields and thick woods. The sun sank lower as the hours blurred together. My knuckles stayed white on the steering wheel. The deeper I went, the more wrong it felt. The world got quiet in a way it shouldn't. No other cars, no houses, just trees and open land and a feeling like I was leaving the normal world behind. And then I saw it. A small white house, sitting alone like it had been placed there on purpose. Bright red roof, 2 square front windows like eyes staring back at me. A short picket fence around the yard. Every fence slat was painted a faded rainbow. My stomach tightened so hard it hurt. It looked unreal, like a piece of set design dropped into real countryside. For the first time since the phone call, real doubt hit me like a punch. What am I doing? I could still turn around. I could put the car in reverse and drive until the roads got busy again. I could go home, lock my door, and decide this was just a bad old memory that had finally rotted through my adult brain. My hand moved toward the gear shift. Then the front door of the house creaked open, and there he was, Mr. Wilson. He looked exactly like he had on TV, the same thinning black hair, the same warm expression. He hadn't aged. Not a day, not a wrinkle more. It wasn't like seeing someone who'd taken care of themselves. It was like seeing a picture come to life. He smiled when he saw me, wide and bright, like I was the guest he'd been waiting for all along. "Come on in, kiddo," he called. His voice carried across the yard, gentle and inviting. And the worst part is what happened inside me when I heard it. My fear didn't grow. It faded. A stupid, happy smile spread across my face before I could stop it. Warmth bubbled up in my chest, clean and simple, like being welcomed by family. It pushed the doubt aside. It made the whole scene feel normal, like I was pulling up to a relative's house for a holiday. Before I understood what I was doing, I was stepping out of the car. I walked toward that rainbow fence like it was the safest thing on earth. Mr. Wilson opened the door wider, still smiling. "Welcome home, kiddo. Sparky is waiting for you. Welcome home." The words settled over me like a blanket. My shoulders loosened. My feet moved on their own. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice screamed that none of this was possible, that no one stays the same for 40 years, that I should run. But that voice sounded far away, like it was coming from another room. The inside of the house smelled like my childhood imagination, crayons and dust and something faintly sweet, like cereal milk. The living room was the set, not similar, not inspired by. It was the exact layout, the same cheap, bright colors, the same rainbow fence against one wall. Lighting rigs hung from the ceiling. An old camera sat on a tripod, pointed at a worn mark on the floor like someone had been standing there every day for decades. And behind the fence, sitting upright like nothing had ever happened, was Sparky. The puppet's head was tilted just right. The floppy ears hung in that familiar way. The grin looked wider than I remembered, stretched almost too far, like the paint had been pulled. Mr. Wilson closed the front door behind me. The click sounded final. "There he is," he whispered happily, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Our favorite morning friend came back. Just like we always knew you would." Sparky's mouth moved, and I heard the clicking teeth. Clack, clack, clack. "Hiya, buddy," Sparky chirped. "I missed you so much." My knees buckled. I sank down right in front of the fence the exact way I used to sit as a kid. My face hurt with how hard I was smiling. "I missed you too," I whispered, and it came out real. That's what scares me the most. The joy I felt wasn't fake. It was like someone reached into my chest and squeezed the part of me that still wanted to believe in mornings and cartoons and safe routines. Sparky tilted his head. "That's my good boy," he said warmly. "Here, the mornings never pass. You don't have to worry about school or your parents or anything else ever again. It can be just like it used to be, every day." For a moment, it felt perfect. A warm fog filled my head. The fear melted away. The world shrank down to the fence, the set, the familiar voices. Then Sparky went still, not limp like Halloween night, still in a different way, like a machine pausing. His painted smile didn't change, but his voice did. It dropped into something low and serious, something too adult to be coming from that puppet. "But you aren't here for that," Sparky said. "Are you?" The warmth in my chest thinned. Cold air slid back into my lungs. Mr. Wilson's hand tightened on my shoulder, fingers pressing in like he was holding me in place. Sparky leaned forward over the fence, unblinking eyes aimed straight at mine. "You want to know what happened on Halloween night. You want the truth. Go ahead then, kiddo. Ask me." I nodded, still kneeling like an obedient child. Sparky's head moved smoothly, too smoothly, and the cartoon voice was gone completely now. "See, that night, That night, he said, and there was exhaustion in his tone, like he'd been carrying the memory for a long time. I had a kid once, just like you back then. Same age. I made that show for her. It was all for her. The room felt heavier. The lights above looked brighter in a harsh way, like a studio that suddenly stopped being magical. She loved Sparky, he continued. She loved seeing her dad on TV every morning. Clack, 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 slow and steady, like teeth tapping in thought. She used to sit right where you are, telling her friends at school her daddy was the one behind Sparky the dog. We were happy. Until her mother decided I wasn't good enough, Sparky said, the words flat with old anger, decided she was going to take my little girl away from me. So on Halloween night, Sparky said softly, I made sure that didn't happen. I didn't want my little angel to die too, Sparky went on, calm like he was explaining a simple lesson. But she went away with her mother that night. There was barely anything left to scrape off the asphalt. I felt my whole body tense. My skin prickled. The fog in my head ripped open enough for panic to seep in. So I had to improvise, Sparky said. Mr. Wilson's fingers tightened until it hurt, like claws. Sparky's voice turned almost affectionate again, like he was talking about a pet he loved. See, kiddo, she needs fresh parts. That's why you're here. But don't worry, Margaret always wanted a little brother. What does that mean? I managed to choke out. Sparky's painted eyes stayed wide and empty. His voice stayed calm. We'll just take that and that from you. You won't need them here anyway. I tried to stand. My legs shook under me. Mr. Wilson shoved me back down with shocking strength. Not gentle host strength. Not old man strength. It felt like iron. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, heavy, dragging. They came from the hallway leading deeper into the house, where the lights didn't reach as well. Each step sounded wet, like something was being pulled across the floor. Sparky clicked his teeth again, cheerful now. Clack, clack, clack. She's coming to meet you, buddy, he said. Isn't that nice? I tried to twist around, but Mr. Wilson's hands locked me in place. Then one of his hands shot forward and grabbed my chin. His grip was brutal. He wrenched my head to the side so hard pain flashed through my jaw and teeth. Through watering eyes, I saw her. A small figure stood in the hallway doorway wearing a faded pink dress with little flowers on it. The dress looked like it belonged to a child, but above the dress was something that didn't belong to any child. A huge dog head, bulky and wrong, covered in dirty brown fur. Floppy ears hung limply. Giant glass eyes bulged forward and reflected the light with a dead shine. Below them was a wide dog mouth stuffed with yellowed teeth and a swollen tongue hanging out to one side. Thick saliva dripped onto the floor in slow ropes. She breathed like she was drowning, wet, choking gasps that made my stomach turn. Mr. Wilson leaned close to my ear. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with something that sounded like pride and madness mixed together. Say hello to your new big sister, kiddo. A gurgling sound came out of her throat. It almost sounded happy. Behind me, Sparky's voice rang out bright and joyful again, like the morning show had started. Look, Margaret, your little brother is finally home. Margaret slapped one clumsy paw against the floor, like a dog wagging a tail. Then she started limping forward, each step labored and wet. She lowered herself onto the carpet beside me, too close. Her presence filled the space. The fur smelled old. The saliva smelled worse. That huge tongue dragged across my cheek in what I think was meant to be a loving lick. It was cold and slick. The smell hit me all at once. Rotting meat, damp fur, and something sweet and spoiled underneath. I forced myself to smile. I don't know why. Survival, maybe. Some instinct that told me if I acted like a good boy, they might not hurt me right away. Only then did Mr. Wilson release my chin. He gave me a heavy pat on the back like, congratulations, knocking the air out of me. I bet my kids would love a little show to celebrate that our family is finally complete. Sparky squealed from behind the fence. His voice overflowed with fake excitement.